Arcturian group, spiritual evolution is a process. Welcome, dear readers. If these messages resonate with you, it means the information is already a part of your consciousness, or the words would not make sense to you, nor would you be drawn to read them. We bring absolute truth through these messages because it is the reality from which everything is built. But we are fully aware that truth does not automatically become one state of consciousness simply upon hearing about it unless the spiritual work was done in previous lifetimes, which is true of the few highly evolved spiritual masters who over time have come and gone on Earth. Spiritual evolution is a process because having lived hundreds of lifetimes under the influence of three-dimensional energy and having experiences of good and bad, humans have come to believe it is reality and continue to live under its influence. Evolution does not happen overnight because most physical bodies could not withstand a sudden influx of high resonating energy, but mostly because humans who have free will need time to learn about, accept, consciously disregard the old, and practice until truth moves from the mind to being a state of consciousness. Unaware of what they are actually doing on Earth, humans have been spiritually evolving through the experiences of every lifetime over thousands of years. Every individual will eventually come to know who and what they are simply because it is reality. The intellectual knowledge of absolute truth is just the first step towards it becoming an attained state of consciousness where it can then manifest. Many are drawn to seek truth but limit it to the confines of their current belief system, attempting to make it fit into what they already know and believe. Truth cannot and will never align with false religious concepts, and so this type of seeker simply disregards the truth she may have heard about, often deciding that truth is too impractical to take seriously. Every person eventually reaches a point at which they no longer need the difficult experiences of living in three-dimensional energy to learn and evolve. At this point, the higher self, that part of every person that has never forgotten who it is, begins to draw to the person the lessons, insights, information, and desire for spiritual knowledge that they are ready for. Intention is the key. Contrary to popular belief, a spiritual seeker is not the director of the process and does not need to go to church, do a lot of praying, suffer, or practice metaphysical activities in order to move deeper into spiritual realization. It automatically begins with a sincere desire, intention, and choice to know the truth about self and God, which then allows the spiritual completeness already present in every person's consciousness to unfold under the direction of the inner director. For most, this is the start of a very difficult and painful time, because a sincere intention to evolve automatically begins the process of moving beyond and clearing much that has become familiar, comfortable, and acceptable to self, family, friends, and society. The seeker's current foundational belief system begins to crumble in order for a new and higher resonating one to replace it. However, because most at this point are still aligned with old energy, they interpret this phase of their journey as being failure rather than a graduation, and many proceed to go about trying to put everything back to normal. Powers other than the one divine power do not exist in absolute truth. So in reality, there are no victims, disease, or lack and limitation, unless these beliefs constitute your state of consciousness, because everyone's consciousness is the one consciousness, individualized, always creating and expressing. 1. Some of you will reject or be offended by these words because they do not reflect what you presently see and experience. They may seem cold and uncaring, but you are spiritually ready to move into a state of consciousness that understands and accepts the truth about the material world. How could an omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient God, divine consciousness, be subject to anything outside of itself if nothing exists outside of self? Believing that there are powers other than the one power is a form of idolatry. We have previously given the example of seeing the human mind as a pan for baking and consciousness as being the batter or dough. It does not matter how fancy, well-made, or expensive the pan if the batter is corrupted. The results will always reflect the contents of the batter. We are well aware that in the material world, disease, lack, war, separation, and an infinity of other issues do indeed act as powers, but the third dimension is not reality. It is an illusory concept of the real world of God's creating. The time is now in the high frequencies of the Ascension process to move beyond the veils of illusion that have hypnotized mankind for centuries. World over, increasingly more are beginning to see separation beliefs for what they really represent, are discarding them, and opening to ideas of oneness. God did not create the three-dimensional world you know, see, experience, and have believed to be reality. God knows nothing about what mankind is dreaming because the material world does not exist in divine consciousness. If it did, everything in the three-dimensional world would be held in place by divine law, never to be healed, changed, or eliminated. We are not saying to ignore the three-dimensional issues and so-called powers of three-dimensional living that you all struggle with on some level. We are saying that the intellectual awareness and acceptance of one power must be and is the only foundation from which a new, higher, and more evolved state of consciousness can be built. Most of you will need to continue utilizing familiar three-dimensional tools for a while, but as you move deeper into truth consciousness, you will find this becoming less and less. First, recognize the issue or problem you may be dealing with as being a three-dimensional appearance, having no law to support or maintain it, because God is the only law and reality. Then take whatever human footsteps you are guided to take. Never pretend a state of consciousness you have not yet attained, but rather simply make truth the first step from which you make every decision. It is important to remember that good human appearances are no more real than bad human appearances. Spending a few minutes each day in meditation or reading a bit of spiritual literature and then going back to living solely from three-dimensional concepts and beliefs is not going to shift you into the new energies. Once known, truth must be lived if it is to eventually become one state of consciousness. Living a mystical life in earlier times was only possible in monasteries or convents. But that concept is obsolete. The mystical life can and must be lived each day and not held as something separate for the few that are holier. The mystical life consists of acknowledging every person to be a divine being in spite of any outer appearances, knowing that God is the driver of every vehicle, and recognizing that the reality underlying all business is love, service, or product, and gratitude, payment. It is acknowledging the light of divine life in the eyes of every animal and noticing and appreciating the order and infinity of all plant life. Hold truth secretly and sacredly in your heart as you go about what may seem to be ordinary work, play, or tasks. When you do this, You lift the energy of whatever you are doing into a higher resonance. No activity or employment is more spiritual than another if it flows on streams of love and service, oneness. Jobs that are often considered by society to be of a low level, done only by unimportant, uneducated, or people on the fringe, can be, and often are, activities of healing, love, and change for others when done by someone with an evolved state of consciousness. What you are seeing on Earth at this time represents a phase of the ascension process and not the completion. It will take a few years for the process to complete, but never doubt that it has begun and cannot be stopped by those promoting old beliefs from a sense of self-righteousness in attempts to drag the evolving collective back into outgrown concepts, beliefs, and states of consciousness. The dense energies that have long controlled the world for profit, control, and power do not want humans to remember who they are for. Where would that leave them? Do not be afraid. The light has already won because it is reality. Allow the process in the realization that Earth's ascension is not dependent on anything you or anyone else may do other than hold light, because the ascension process is a divine plan, not a human plan. The one omnipresent reality is closer to you than your breathing. It is the life and intelligence of every cell and every breath you take. It is the ever-present silence within just awaiting recognition. Allow the already fully present I am within to express in, as, and through you. Nindi, we are the Arcturian group.